everyone. My name is Dolin, and for the last 24 years, I've spent time helping kids through my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants, helping kids to do better in school and then ultimately get into the college of their choice. And one of the most important things we do here at Educational Connections is to help kids with ADHD and executive function difficulties to be more effective in school. And we show them how to study smarter, but not necessarily harder, so that they can get the grades that they want. And every day, parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And when it comes to math and writing, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, they often say similar things. Here are some things we hear from parents. Oh, just getting my kid to sit down and focus on math is a battle. I'm worried she won't be able to keep up. If it's like this now, if it's this difficult now, what's it going to be like in the future? I feel like I'm constantly nagging my son about his writing assignments. You know what? I've got 2 other kids to worry about. She's not my only one. Does any of this sound familiar? Now, on the other hand, here's what kids say. Why do I have to know this? This is stupid. Don't micromanage me, Mom. I'll do it eventually. I promise I'll turn it in. So why do these things happen, especially with kids with ADHD? Parents are worried, and kids don't seem to have the skills to stay focused, to finish a task, and ultimately to turn it into their teacher. Well, it's easy to think that these issues are related to perhaps character flaws or motivation, or maybe kids just don't want to do well in school. But really, they boil down to something that we call executive functions. So what are executive function skills? Well, according to Tom Brown, who is on the forefront of research into executive functions, he categorizes them in 6 distinct areas. First, organization, prioritizing, and activating. So you've got 3 things to do. Can you get organized enough and order those things in priorities, and then motivate yourself well enough to start the first task? Once you get started, can you focus long enough to finish it? And then can you shift your attention to start something new? Can you regulate your alertness? Can you realize when you're kind of dragging and plodding and you need to pick it up? Can you manage your frustrations, especially when something feels boring or hard and you don't want to do it? Can you modulate your emotions to finish? We're going to talk about the next one a lot tonight, and it's called working memory. So I'm going to come back to that. And then lastly, this is actually the last executive function skill to come online, because these are all mental processes in the frontal lobe of the brain. And we all know that the frontal lobe of the brain is the last part of the brain to really develop in people. So it has to do with monitoring your behavior and self-regulating. Example, you're working on a history assignment and you've been distracted a lot. Before you know it, you've been watching YouTube videos for 45 minutes. Can you self-correct and say, this isn't a good idea. I need to get back to that assignment. That's self-regulating. So oftentimes when parents and teachers hear about these things, they think, well, this kind of sounds a lot like ADHD. What's the connection? And here's the thing. People with ADHD have executive function weaknesses. Everybody with ADHD has these issues in some form or another. But not everybody with executive function weaknesses meets the criteria of ADHD. To me, it doesn't matter. Whether you have a diagnosis or not, you're going to want to help your child. You're going to want to make sure your student has the support he needs to do okay in school. So let me go back to that one executive function. I called it working memory. It's so important, especially when it comes to math and writing. Here's the thing about working memory. It's not short-term memory, and it's not long-term memory. It's actually your brain's ability to juggle multiple thoughts at the moment. And it's crucial for things like solving problems and completing tasks. So let me give you an example. This is probably one you can relate to. You say to your son, hey, go up into your room, get your coat on, grab your gloves, and oh, don't forget to brush your teeth. That's working memory, juggling those three things in your head. But chances are he comes downstairs with his coat, he doesn't have his gloves, and he hasn't brushed his teeth. Why not? Because it's a lot to think about in the moment. We see this all the time in subjects like writing. Oh, wait, what's a good topic sentence? Does this make sense? Did I use the right vocabulary word? Do I have a capital letter? Is my grammar right? Have I spelled the words correctly? Am I using a period or a question mark at the end? Again, juggling lots of thoughts. Reading. Oh, who is this character? Where does he fit into the story? What is the sequence of this event? Wait, what just happened before this? Math. Oh, long division. First, I need to divide this number into that number. Then I need to put the answer at the top. Wait, now I need to multiply those two. And then I have to put the answer down here. Oh, wait, what do I do next? I subtract and then I bring down. Again, working memory. Kids often feel overwhelmed and underprepared. Overwhelmed. This feels big, hard, arduous, underprepared. I don't really know how to do this. I don't necessarily have the skills. It feels like too much to even get started. So when kids are feeling like that, the first thing we want to do is to make sure the basics are in place when it comes to writing. So for young kids, the basics include holding the pencil correctly. And this sounds like something super simple, but you would be surprised that kids have unusual grips. So you can play around with this by trying out different grips, and you can go onto Amazon and type in pencil grips and you'll see all kinds of things. I'd experiment, kind of be a detective to see if one helps your child. The other thing we see with young kids is that writing is fatiguing for them, partially because they're pushing down really hard on the paper and they get tired easily. Instead, experiment with a slant board. So they're writing like this at an angle, and that helps to take the pressure off. As kids get older, they're not doing too much with pencil and paper anymore, but they are using a keyboard. And I'd recommend using a mechanical keyboard as an external keyboard if your child has a laptop. And the reason this can be helpful is that often laptop keyboards are flat. It's hard to feel your way around the keyboard. Mechanical keyboards have raised keys. And what's cool about this one, it's actually my son's recommendation. He has ADHD, and a lot of kids use this one. It's Logitech mechanical keyboard. You can program it so that it changes colors. There's an uplight for colors. And we all know that for kids with ADHD, novelty helps to improve attention. So those are just the basics. But let's talk about kids that have difficulty organizing their thoughts. This is super common with kids with ADHD. We see these kids all the time in my practice. Parents say it, oh my God, he's so verbal, so smart, tells you a story a mile long. Ask him to put it down on paper. No deal. So what do you do in that case? I like graphic organizers because they're visual frameworks that show relationships. So if you say to a student, hey, you need to write that compare and contrast essay, it's going to be really hard. They're not going to know where to start. But if you take this graphic organizer, you put two circles together, they write all the things they know about elephants, all the facts about rhinos, and in the middle, what they have in common. Now they have the outline for a 3-paragraph essay, and it feels so much easier. Sometimes kids aren't at this level yet. They might be younger. How do you get them started when it comes to writing? Well, one way is letting them dictate at just the beginning to you. So you say to your child, we often do this with kids, oh, let's talk about this. What do you want your first sentence to be? I love it. It's brilliant. And then you type it or you write it down as the adult. Then you say, tell me about the next sentence. What do you think would be a good one? That's great. I love it. You write that one down. How about the third sentence? Then you write that one down. What about the next sentence? Oh, I love it too. You write this one down. So now you've helped your child get started. You've gotten them over the hump. They can take it from there. So this is just the adult prompting, the child answering, and the adult typing or writing it down. Now, for older kids with writing, the same thing holds true, but with technology. So kids, obviously, when they're older, we don't want to be sitting next to them. They need to be independent. How can they do this? They can do it through Siri or using voice to text, the microphone in Google Doc or Word. It's just a picture of a little microphone. They click it and it will record what they want to write about. So it captures their thoughts, and they can then use these thoughts that are written down as their outline to get started. If you want to take it one step further, I can recommend a software called Rev. And Rev kind of does the same thing. You dictate what you want to say into your phone, but it's sent to a transcriptionist. And that transcriptionist will type it out for the student, but they'll spell the words correctly and they'll use correct punctuation. And then it's sent back to the student. It does cost money. Usually for an essay, a lengthy essay, it's about $5. But for a lot of kids, it's worth it. And then from there, it will still be all the students' ideas. They can fix it up, and that's much easier for them than starting it on their own. So these are ways to get kids into the groove of working independently. Sometimes, however, kids have difficulty just getting started. So how do you help? I recommend that when we help kids, we recommend that every student, or the ones that it applies to, have a timer on their desk, perhaps a fidget toy, and definitely a whiteboard. I can talk more about those things later. But a timer is super helpful to get going. Sometimes when kids don't have that internal oomph, they need an external oomph to get them going. So a timer allows them to set it for a super short period of time, say 10 minutes. And they say to themselves, I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best I can, focus as much as I can just for 10 minutes, and then I can take a break if I need to. Then they can set the timer again. And what I found is after working on this with kids, this works for kids from kindergarten to college. Once you teach them how to do it, they can often do it themselves later, but they need to be taught and they need to practice with an adult. I call that the tolerable 10. It could be 5 minutes of fury, but it's a short period of time. Now, some kids, they are anxious and they do not like timers. So if that is your kid, do not force them to use a timer. It will make them more anxious. Instead, we teach kids to divide their work by task, not time. So task would be, how can I make this easy to get started? I'm just going to write the topic sentence and then I'll take a break. Or in math, I'm only going to do the evens and then take a break. Or I'll do the first 3 and then I'll take a break. So again, these are little strategies, little hacks to get kids going. Inevitably, you may have a child who is resistant to your overtures. As I mentioned, parents call our office all the time looking for help. And this is super common, especially with kids with ADHD. They have a lower threshold for frustration. So when things are difficult for them, they are much more likely to shut down. And when things are difficult, they go into avoidance mode. Either they do the least amount of work possible or they don't do it at all. So what do you do when you have a resistant kid? Well, let me share with you something called the stages of behavior change. This is based on the trans-theoretical model. And basically, this model says anytime a human being, whether it's a second grader or a 50-year-old, wants to make change, they go through certain stages of behavior. For example, let's say that and it can be with anything. It could be weight loss. It could be exercising. It can be homework. Let's say that the issue is the student needs to write things down to remember to do them. He may be in a school where teachers are inconsistent. Some teachers post it to this portal, some don't. Some write it on the board. They kind of do different things. So the student needs to have a way of recording the assignments. Now, Sometimes the kid will not see us as a problem, and they are at the pre-contemplation stage, meaning that they say, no way, it's not a problem and I'm not going to change. Or they may be just above that. I kind of see it as a problem. It's not that bad right now. Maybe later I'll think about doing something different. Or they may be at the preparation stage. You know what? Tomorrow I need to try a new way. This isn't really working for me. I tried it like this and I'm forgetting a lot of things. Action is, you know what? Every day I'm trying this. I'm using an app on my phone, or maybe they're using a planner, or they're using their Google Calendar to record their assignments. And then maintenance is when they're regularly doing that skill. So sometimes kids come to us and they're at the pre-contemplation stage. And this is super common with kids with ADHD. And I will tell you that forcing them to do something does not work. If you find as a parent, the more you push, the more they push back, it's a sign to disengage. That style isn't going to work for this particular child. So when kids come to us unwilling to change, we want to figure out our way in. We will meet them where they are. So we have something called a student self-assessment, where we've broken down the specific skills kids need to do well in school. These are study habits. For example, the first one is when it comes to recording assignments, it allows kids to categorize themselves. I don't see a problem. This isn't an issue at all for me. That means they're at the bottom of the scale. Sometimes they're at the middle. Sometimes they're at the top. But what I've found over many years of doing this is that when kids come to us, they may be at the bottom of the scale for a couple of things, but typically there's something that they own, that they know this is an issue for me, and that's where we start. We don't start with a thing they're refusing. We start with a thing that they're willing to think about changing. And I would recommend that approach, because that's the way in, and that's the way we build trust, so that kids see, you know what, this is okay. I'm learning something. I'm getting something out of this. Because once kids trust you, then you can go the back door and work on that thing that they were kind of resistant about at first. Why is math so hard for kids? It's because math is cumulative. It's a subject, just like as kids get into high school, a math-based science like chemistry and physics, or a foreign language. Those three types of subjects have something in common. One skill builds upon another. So when kids get behind or they don't have basic skills, it's super hard to learn new material. And it's incredibly hard for kids to get themselves out of a situation and teach themselves. It hardly ever works unless they get help. That help could be from their teacher, the college student down the street, a professional. But in a cumulative subject, typically kids need help. All right, so if you don't mind, I want to take you back to the year of 1983. You might remember it. It was the year of Love Boat, Flashdance, and Three's Company. And there I am, sitting in the front row of my 8th grade algebra class. I look up at the board, and my shoulders ache, and my neck hurts. And I realize I just can't focus, and I'm never going to get this math. Now, at home, my parents knew I was having a problem in math. It wasn't anything new. And one day, my dad comes into my room and says, "It's okay, Aunt, I'm going to help you with this math." And honestly, who better to help me with math than my dad? He loved it. He was an engineer by trade. He never got less than an A in math, and he loved preciseness in numbers. So we sit down to solve the first problem. Sit down at my little yellow Ethan Allen desk. And we get to the end, and I say it's negative, and he says it's positive. And this goes back and forth a few times until all of a sudden, my dad, who's usually very kind, loving, and mild-mannered, gets so frustrated, he stands up, his face is bright red, his lips are pursed. He takes my book. I back away, like, what is going on? And before I know it, he hurls it across the room. It hits the wall and papers fly everywhere. And I say to my dad, what's going on? You're that mad about math? And my mom, hearing all this commotion, comes down the hall and says, that's it. You're not helping her anymore and you're getting a tutor. And at the time, I thought this was positively the worst idea ever. I didn't think I needed the help. I thought I could figure out this myself, but I really couldn't. And my mom was right. So so it turns out she brings me to this place called Beachside Learning Center. And I meet with this man named Mr. Rogo. And Mr. Rogo helped to turn my life around, especially when it came to math. And he said, Anne, you know what? I really think you can learn this math. I'm going to teach you a couple things. And the first thing he said is that I'm going to use a concept called previewing. And that means that the reason you're having difficulty when you go into class every day is that you don't have anything to anchor. So when you don't understand what's going on, it's hard to focus. So he said, I'm going to preview the last 5 minutes so that I show you what's going to happen in class, and you're going to be able to understand a little bit better. And then he said, and I'm going to teach you a way to learn math and to study for tests. And I was all about it because at the time, what he also explained to me was that I had these holes in my learning, that I had these gaps, kind of like Swiss cheese. Just like cheese has holes, so can learners. And it's not unique. The problem wasn't unique to me. A lot of kids have it. And even to this day, we see Swiss cheese kids all the time, especially when it comes to math. They sit in class just like I do. They try to pay attention and they get some skills here and there. But when they go home to do their homework, they don't have it all. So they slap down any old answer just to make it look like they did the work, or they don't do it at all. So here's what we know about math. There are strategies for practicing math. Number one, just like Mr. Rogo taught me, if kids can preview the material before they see it, they're going to be able to focus more. If kids learn how to create a study guide, this is far better than the way they usually study. So this is how most kids usually study on their own, if they even do. They get their study guide or they look back at their notes, they read through them, and then they announce, I've studied. That's not how you study for math. The way you study for math is that you look at some problems that you've already solved that are correct, maybe from your notes or maybe in the book, and you rewrite them on a new piece of paper and you make yourself solve them. That's what Mr. Rogo did with me. And in fact, this concept of self-testing, we know now through lots of research that it's the number one way to learn and retain any information, not just math. So kids, when we work with kids, at first we create the study guide, we teach them how to do it, and we practice so that they can ultimately do it on their own. And then the other concept that we do with kids is called distributed practice. This works for all subjects, not just math. The idea is, you can study on Thursday night for an hour, but if you take that same amount of time and you study for 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 Wednesday, 20 Thursday, that concept of practicing over time instead of a one lump helps commit the information to memory. It cements it into long-term memory so that you know it later on. You just haven't crammed for passing that first test. Now, when it comes to younger kids, there are some strategies you can use too. Kids with ADHD are often very disorganized with their writing. So encourage them to use graph papers. It helps them to put their numbers in the right place. For word problems, which are really hard for many of our students, it doesn't usually work when they just have to read something and solve it. Instead, encourage them to draw a picture. This helps with a visual representation of what they have to do. But ultimately, when it comes to math, frustration is super common. And you may find yourself in that situation with your child. They need help, and you're not quite sure how to do it. So when kids are struggling as a parent, you have three choices when it comes to help. You can say, You know what, buddy? This is your homework, not mine. I already went to fifth grade. Probably not a good idea because we want our kids to be able to come to us when they feel like they're having trouble. And this might dissuade them from doing that in the future. Or you could say, listen, Joey, this is how you do it. Let me show you. But often we hear from kids, that's not how Mrs. Smith said to do it. Or you could say, hey, do you have any examples of this in your notes or in your book? And this is really the best idea. And this is the best idea because it's leading the student to solve their own problem, to look to see, is there an example of this that's already been used that I can take a look at? It's fostering independence. So ultimately, if you're working with your kids and they need help, you might want to check in with them regularly. It's a parent's role to check in, make sure everything's going well. And if it's not, to seek support. And again, as I mentioned, that support could be connecting with the teacher. If there's peer tutoring at school, or getting help from the college student down the street, getting a professional tutor or a professional executive function coach. But what I've found with kids with ADHD, it can't be just every now and then. It can't be once when they're having difficulty and never again. It needs to be consistent. Kids with ADHD need regular, consistent support for accountability. All right, so a couple other things. If you see that your child's having difficulty, I would recommend using the I've noticed approach. I personally think these words I've noticed are magic. I've used them with kids over many years. I think they work especially great if you want to talk to the teacher about something too. Instead of like, you're giving too much homework. Jimmy can't possibly do all this. It sounds better and feels less defensive if you say something like, I've noticed Jimmy has a lot of homework. Or I've noticed Jimmy's struggling with this. Can you help? That might feel better. So for kids, I've noticed feels better too. I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of your math work. That might sound better than, gee, you have 5 missing assignments. When are you ever going to finish these? Or I've noticed equations are really hard. Tell me about that. So I've noticed it's hard to stay on top of your math work is something that's big picture. Maybe it's specific. I noticed equations are really hard. Why do you use these words? Well, it allows us just to observe the observable and to listen, to say, oh, you know what? I get it. Kids will say all kinds of things like, it's so unfair. I have the hardest math teacher in all of 7th grade. It's easy to say, that's not true. Your sister had her and she's a great teacher. But instead saying, I get it. You're right. This is a hard subject. And listen, nod, and empathize with kids. And the reason this is helpful is it helps us to be on the same page. We don't have to agree with our child, but we can earn their trust and open a dialogue, and they can feel like they're heard. And when they're calm, they're more likely to be able to follow through with something. When you're talking with your child, oh, tell me more about that. Or, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Or if your child comes up with a solution, you might say, I love it. How might you get started? Or what's one easy thing you can do to get going? I also think asking powerful questions is helpful for kids to help them to figure out stuff on their own. It's almost like you want to be a detective with your child. So let's say the issue is that your child is, since the pandemic, they're not sitting at a desk anymore. They're doing their homework on their bed. Or what we've seen more of is kids doing homework under their blanket and maybe making this little cocoon, which isn't really that productive for kids. So ideally, kids should be sitting at a desk if they can tolerate it, even not for a long period of time, but for something hard, it helps if you're sitting instead of laying down. That often promotes sleep more than focus. So instead of saying, you need to be sitting and doing this, you might say, I wonder, I know getting finished is hard. What if you tried it one way for the next 20 minutes, sitting on your bed, and then tomorrow for 20 minutes, you sit at your desk and see how they're different? Music, this is a big one for kids. Is music good or bad? So in general, research shows that for most kids, not for everybody, and for some kids with ADHD, it's helpful, but it can split focus. So when you're listening to the lyrics and you're studying for a history test, that's going to split your focus. Maybe not so much if it's instrumental or if it's super familiar music, but nonetheless, if it is interfering with kids' productivity, you might say, oh, I wonder if you could try it one way. One day you do your math with music, one day you do your math without music, and see how they're different. Have a discussion over that. Phone accessibility. Are phones distracting? What we know from research, and we share this with our students all the time, is that you don't necessarily need your phone to do your homework. You might need your laptop, but not your phone. But what if you put your phone on the other side of the room just for 20 minutes to see if you're more effective and focused in getting your work done? And then you check your text messages and then you set it again for 20 minutes. Would that be helpful? So again, kind of like being a detective. I found this method to be so much better for kids than telling them what to do. Because as many of us know, kids with ADHD do not want to be told what to do. The other thing I found to be helpful for kids with ADHD is to teach them how to ask for help. It's super common that they may need help, but they don't want to ask for it. And so as parents, when we say, go talk to your teacher about this, just email her, she'll help you, they won't do it. So how do you get your child over that hump? One way is to teach them how to compose an email. Let's take a look at this example. I'm going to read it out loud. It's an example of a student wrote this email to her teacher. This is one of our students, and we taught her to do this. Okay. Dear Mrs. Smith, good morning. I'm writing to you about my algebra quiz corrections. When I log on to Schoology, which is their Canvas, their portal, it shows as submitted. However, it has now been more than 2 weeks and there is no grade associated with this. Please let me know if something is missing or if you need me to resubmit it. Thank you for your time and I'll see you in class this afternoon. Mary. Oh my gosh. Isn't this amazing? We would love for our kids to do this. But the reality is telling your kid to do this, it just will not work. It feels overwhelming. Kids don't know how to do this type of thing, but they can do it if they have a template. So this is a template that we use. Dear teacher's name, good morning. Always include a friendly greeting. It's basically telling the student what to write. I am writing to you about. Here, explain what the assignment is you're asking about, what the issue is, and the steps you've already taken. So sometimes kids with ADHD need practice in advocating for themselves. And what I found is that once they do this, when they can do this once or twice and they get back positive feedback, like the teacher writes back to them and helps them, they're much more willing to do it in the future, but they just need to get over this hump. And if you want this template, just text the same number, 55444, the word advocacy, and it will be sent to you. So at the end of the day, I believe that preserving relationships is one of the most important things we can do as parents. Parents do not have to have the role of homework police, which is what often happens when kids have ADHD. And understanding where your child fits into this equation. If your child is willing to work with you, great. And if they're not, seeking outside help can make a big difference. Keeping it positive at the end of the day is really where it's at, because if we can keep things positive for our kids and we can remain calm, it makes everything just a little bit better. Kristen says, my child's ADHD is impacting his math and writing, but he still tests above grade level. He's bored in class, learning things he already has mastered. Do I show his teachers that he actually comprehends, even higher than what his performance shows, a lot of silly errors, copying the wrong numbers, etc. Yeah, and I might go back, Kristen, and use the words I've noticed. I noticed that my son is frustrated over math. Do you have suggestions for us? I've noticed that he's mastered these skills, but he just makes silly errors. What do you think? Because those types of errors, copying things down incorrectly, not reading the directions fully, or skipping steps, are super common for kids with ADHD. And it doesn't necessarily mean they can't do the work. And sometimes teachers don't quite get that. They think, well, if they're making those mistakes, we should focus on fixing those mistakes. But for a kid, that is their weakness. And it's really hard to fix that weakness. So I would focus more on the content of it. I've used the words I've noticed, and I'd brainstorm with the teachers. I would bring it to her attention, the teacher's attention for sure. Let's see. What do you do if your child gets bored easily, if the homework is easy? And this is common too. If the homework is too easy, I say to kids, it's the same thing as they think it's hard and they don't want to do it. You're right, this is hard. Or you know what, you're right, this is easy. But it's just part of what you have to do in this class. It's part of, your job of working through this homework. So although I understand, you don't want to do it, it's just part of this class. And in order to do well in this class, you got to do the homework so that you can get on to the next grade level. It's a little bit easier as kids get older because we can start to tie things to graduating in college and they start to see the connection. It's a little bit harder when they're younger. So the answer is to let them know, yes, you're right. This is easy. This is hard. But we're just going to get through this to get to the next step. My daughter has difficulty in English and math. Do you have a program in Toronto? And the answer is yes. All of our work is online, so we can absolutely help your daughter. Roshini says, my 9-year-old with ADHD constantly needs reminders to start and to stay focused. She is brilliant, but doesn't always transfer it onto the results. How can we help her? So here's the thing. You don't want to get in the role of a parent as having to dole out constant reminders and come on, honey, focus. You're almost done. You can do this. It just gets tiring for you and it's tiring for her too, because she probably doesn't like, so much negative focus to get stuff done. So I learned this trick from a friend of mine who's a behaviorist. And she says, you ask the student in the very beginning, how many reminders do you think you'll need today to get this math done? For example, let's say you usually give her like 14. Don't say that. Say, how many reminders do you think you'll need? See what she says, maybe 3 or 4. Okay, awesome. 3 or 4. Okay, I'm going to give you these 3 chips. And for each one, this is going to represent a reminder. So I'm going to give you a reminder. And then we'll move the chip over here. That means that there's 2 more reminders. So when you see the reminders, you remember that that's something that you have to do to stay focused without me coming and moving another chip over. You can do the same thing for virtually anything. So it might be that your child is getting up and is asking a lot of questions. You can say, I want you to work independently. There's 3 times you can ask questions. When you're done with these chips, you have to do it on your own. So it kind of gives kids a visual to really focus and get their work done. All right, let's see. You talked about a whiteboard. Yes. Okay. So I love whiteboards. You mentioned that your child's 1st grade. So a whiteboard can totally work for 1st graders. And let's say spelling. We often want to practice spelling with the way that kids are going to take the test. So you'll say the word and then they can write it on the whiteboard. Kids love whiteboards. They might practice more with spelling on a whiteboard rather than pencil and paper. As kids get older, though, I use whiteboards a lot as a visual for them. So let's say that they have to do 3 things. And when we work with kids, one of our mantras is when we're getting started with kids, you don't want to start your homework with math. You don't want to start with English. You don't want to start with science or history. You want to start by having a plan. You need to know, and this is one of the executive function skills I talked about in the beginning, was you have to know what you have to do and you have to prioritize. That is great to go on the whiteboard. All right, so what is it that you have to get done? All right, perfect. Let's put this on the whiteboard so you can see it in front of you. And it's awesome to cross it out or to erase it when you're done. So I like having whiteboards. They're great. You can teach kids how to use them and they can use them themselves. I was over at, funny story, my son, I have two sons, both of them have ADHD, and my older son is 24 now. And he lives in DC. He has a job. And I went into his apartment the other day, and it's so small. It's like a shoebox. His kitchen, his desk is in his kitchen. And right above his desk, he had a whiteboard. And it was just like he did in high school. He had all the things that he wanted to do, like water plants and stuff around his little apartment. But I thought it was interesting that that transferred over to his adult life. All right, let's see. When I allow my kid to take a break after part of his homework is done, he can't remember to resume the homework within a reasonable time or even the timer set. Any suggestions balancing a break into smaller parts? Well, I'm not sure, Shannon, how old your child is, but I will tell you that in general, the sweet spot for getting stuff done for middle and high school kids, even probably older elementary, is about 25 minutes. So this timer might be set to too short of a time. Like that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes is good to get kids started. But if they have to do something for a longer period of time, which older kids do, maybe the timer is set for 25 minutes. There is some interesting research based on the Pomodoro method, which you can Google. And it's actually based on this concept that humans in general can't focus for more than about 25 minutes when working alone. So after that, your motivation wanes, your focus wanes when you're working alone. So we teach kids the Pomodoro method to set the timer for 25 minutes. So I might experiment with longer periods of time. And you might say to your child, Shannon, like, let's be a detective. Let's try it for a longer period of time and see if that works better. I notice misspelling and writing often with our 5th grader who has ADHD. How should parents offer correction for things like spelling and grammar? And what helps spelling stick? Is there anything we can ask from school to support in regards to spelling? So I'm not sure if it's with pencil and paper or if it's on a laptop. You know, what I would say personally is kids with ADHD get so much negative feedback, and I'm not saying this is the case in your house. However, you know, they're often people notice the mistakes that kids with ADHD make, like in reading, they tend to drop word endings a lot. In spelling, they tend to mix up the letters. In writing, they tend to also have issues with grammar, as you're mentioning, or they don't write down all the steps in math. And we kind of focus on the little things. So I probably, unless it's a major issue, I probably wouldn't really make a big deal out of it. I might mention words that they should know how to spell in 5th grade, like there, and there, or because, or against. You know, these common words, they're called Dolch words, sight words. Those are ones they should know how to spell. But the other things, I might pay more attention to what the content of the writing is, because as kids get older, all that stuff will go away. You know, kids that I've worried about, you know, when they're little, it's not a big deal when they're older because they have spell check and there's so much software now that it's not so much an issue for older kids. All right, do you have tips to improve self-confidence? And the answer is yes. Anytime you can believe in your child and say things like, you know what, you're right, this is hard. Empathizing with them is key, but then saying, I have confidence that you're able to sit for 10 minutes and finish this. I wouldn't say things like, I have confidence that you can get all of these right. I have confidence you can get the A on the test. None of that stuff that has to do with, you know, grades. but more, I have confidence that you can remain calm when you're doing that. Showing your child you have confidence in them will instill confidence in themselves. Gabriella says, what is the secret to, oh, I'm sorry. Natalie says, what if my child doesn't grasp one math subject, fails the test, and then still goes on to the next math subject? I'm not sure, Natalie, if you mean like a unit within the year. So usually, if they don't understand one unit in math, unless it's isolated, like the unit is measurement, that's not a big deal. But if it's something like fractions, that's a huge deal, because fractions, decimals, and percents, they're all related. And those skills are proving grounds in elementary school for everything later on. Like, you have to be a master of fractions, decimals, and percents to do well in pre-algebra. Pre-algebra is the foundation for algebra. Algebra is the foundation for calculus and every other math class kids will ever see in high school. And so if they don't grasp one thing and it's not related, I wouldn't so much worry about it. But if it is a related skill, then I would seek out help. What's the secret, from Gabriella, to balancing life for our children among doing homework, studying, resting, eating, being a teen, precisely when processing speed is slow, and even when they are assigned half the workload at school already? I'm not sure, Gabriella, what grade your child is in, but you've probably heard this before, and I still think it's a good idea to keep track of how long things are taking. And if you find that your daughter has been doing something for a long time, it should take a half hour and it's taken her an hour, I would just jot a note to the teacher. You can, put a sticky note on her paper, and she can go and bring it in and talk to the teacher about it. So if it's too much, absolutely talk to the teacher. Sometimes, however, it's the child is more dilly-dallying, and they're doing other things when they should be doing the work. So you kind of have to tease out, is it that they're working really hard and it's too much, or is it that they're completely unfocused and they're doing other things and then they complain that they can't get everything done? If it is the latter, I would say, look, this needs to be done. Pick a time, 8:30, and I'll give you 2 warnings. And if it's not done by 8:30, it needs to be put away, and you need to bring it to school, not done. Kids really do not like bringing work to school that it's incomplete. So if that's the case and it's their choice, I might do that. It usually takes about 3 days before they get the message. So I'd first kind of be a detective and see what's going on. Is it that it's too much work, or, they're just not focused? Any helpful tips for 504 accommodations in these 2 subjects? And sure, for writing, it could be that there are reduced requirements, or I'm not sure the grade of the child, but instead of a handwritten assignment, that it's everything can be sent electronically. It could be the reduced amount. So instead of, a 6-paragraph essay, maybe it's something shorter. For math, I mentioned like showing work. That's where kids always get penalized with ADHD. I do believe that showing work is super helpful, but sometimes kids get nicked for not doing things that is really hard for them. So that even could be written into a 504. JR says, my son can perform with assistance and prompting, but test scores are well below average. What accommodations, if any, should I be advocating for a 3rd grader? Oh, this is the 2nd year repeating the grade. Oh my gosh. Okay. That feels really heavy. To hear that he repeated the grade. If he's struggling with test scores, then that tells me he's struggling with the content. It's too hard, because if you're having to prompt and work with him that much and he's still having a hard time, it means that the work that's being assigned is incorrect for his ability level. And retaining kids with that issue may not solve the problem. So I'm not sure if he has an IEP, If he just has a 504, he likely needs an IEP. And I would go back to the school and keep a record of all the things you're doing, how much time he's spending, and then bringing the test scores. And if they say he's not putting forth the effort, it's likely because he's feeling, that he's feeling unmotivated because it's too hard. It's too much. So I would definitely 100% have a discussion. And if you need to, hire an advocate who can go to bat for you. It's not something that we do, but if you need a recommendation, I can give you a recommendation of somebody who can help you virtually. Melissa, when my child is in first grade, becomes overwhelmed when faced with something new or appears to struggle to get started and stay engaged, how can I support her best? So I think she probably has ADHD. That's probably why you're here. I will tell you, although we want kids to work independently, kids with ADHD need a little bit more hand-holding than the average kid, especially when they're young. So here's the thing with a first grader, you may have to sit with her for most of her homework. But what I would recommend is putting a time limit on it, as I mentioned before, and 100% remaining calm. If she has a meltdown, if she gets upset, I would not engage with that. I would walk away and say, right before I do that, I would say, look, I can tell you're frustrated. You're right. This is hard. I want to give you time to be okay. I'm going to be over here doing my email. And when you're ready, come get me and I'll help you again. That way you're not on her the whole time, that she's able to compose herself and come and get you when she needs help. I would take that approach with a first grader. Can you speak to motivation and homework? How do we create self-motivation? Do you agree with rewards or ways to do it successfully? Motivation, I wish I had the answer to this. This is the number one question, and it's the hardest one to answer because there is no on-off switch to motivation. However, what you can do as a parent is make the environment ripe for motivation, meaning make sure you have the basics. Does your child have a study area? Do you have a routine for getting started? Does your child have help? If they're struggling a lot with motivation, I would find somebody who can assist your child if they're butting heads with you. I found that when kids start to do better, that naturally sparks their motivation. But I would also say that motivation is really tricky. You need lots of things to be motivated. Number one is that you need to see why you're doing this, what the payoff is in this future, and you have to feel like you have the skills to do it. So if kids don't really see why this is important, having somebody who they gel with, who can help them with the content and kind of be a mentor is a really great way to go. But I would tell you also that a friend of mine said, I was talking to her, I can't even remember what we're talking about. She's a psychologist, and we're talking about ADHD, and this topic came up. And she said, you know what? I think that ADHD is the disorder of motivation. And I said, you know what? I think you're right. A lot of kids, they look like they're unmotivated for certain things, but they're motivated with other things. I can remember when my older son, what I just mentioned, I think he was like in, I don't know, 7th or 8th grade. I think actually it was 8th grade. I came home from work one day and he's sitting on the couch and he's got no books around him, but he's like typing, he's like punching numbers in this calculator. And I said, oh, what are you doing? And he said, I'm trying to figure out the lowest grade I can get on my algebra test and still get a B. And some of our kids are really strategic like that. They are path of least resistance. They will do the work, but it's a minimum amount just to get by. It doesn't mean that later on they can't be successful when they find what they love, but it does mean that they may need a lot of support along the way to get to that point later.